There are over 500 articles and more than 1 million words on hacking Chinese. How are you supposed to absorb all that information and inspiration as a student? Let's discuss how to get the most out of my website and podcast. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, I want to take a step back and answer a question that isn't directly about learning Mandarin, but instead about how to approach all the advice I have about learning Mandarin. So in most episodes and articles, I focus on a specific aspect of learning or teaching the language that you can hopefully get something from and improve the way you learn. But the problem is that I've been running Hacking Chinese for almost 15 years now, and like I said in the intro, there are more than 500 articles and about 1 million words on the website. If you were to read through all the articles and distill some kind of to-do list based on the advice or information contained in these episodes, the list of things to do would be very long. It would be way too long for anybody to implement, even given a lot of patience. Naturally, this is not what I recommend. If you're listening to the podcast, simply browse the list of episodes to see if you find something interesting, and if you're willing to go to the website, there is a lot more guidance for what to read first. For example, if you're a beginner, you can go to the beginner category where I've collected all the articles that are relevant for beginners and also written an introduction specifically for you. If there is some specific issue you want to help with, such as listening, speaking, and so on, maybe learning characters, there are categories for these things as well, or you can just go to the articles page, the archive, and search, because it's quite likely that I have covered most of the things people ask about learning Mandarin. One question or complaint or comment I sometimes get from listeners and readers is, how am I supposed to be able to absorb all this information? If you refer to a specific article, that is not so strange. It's about something fairly specific usually, and there are some things you can act on, and there is some information or advice that will help you along the way. However, this creates a problem for you as a student, because when you approach Hacking Chinese, let's say you visit the website for the first time, it's very overwhelming, and if you search for something like Chinese characters, there might be 25, 30 articles to read, and how do you know which to start with, which is the best one, which has the most essential advice, and so on. And this is something that is also difficult for me as a writer, because it's hard to both cover things that are interesting in depth and then also do overviews that pick out the most interesting things and the most useful things for you as a student. And remember, students are different. For some students, this might be most important, and for some other students, something else might be more important. So the audience matters, and the audience's goals matter too, and this makes this question rather tricky. And the best solution I have to offer is the courses that I have created on Hacking Chinese. They cover the same types of topics and help you overcome the same types of challenges that we normally talk about here on the podcast, but instead of having fragmentary articles and episodes, all the information and advice is distilled into video lessons that you can directly apply to your own learning situation. And unlike the podcast and website, the courses are more carefully structured, making it easier to know what to focus on first. The reason I want to talk about the courses in this episode is because there is a back-to-school discount that lasts until Wednesday next week. That's August 20th, and if you apply the code provided in the show notes, you will get a $31 discount for any available course. For more information about the courses, you can simply head over to hackingchinese.com/courses. I have created 4 courses, even though one of them, the Fluent Listener, won't open for registration until the end of August. So in this episode, I want to talk about each of these courses, what problems they will help you solve, and what you need to know before you enroll. It's these courses that I offer that allow me to publish this podcast and all the articles on the website entirely for free, and hopefully I will be able to do so in the future as well. I'm deeply thankful for the people who have purchased my courses over the years and enabled me to keep this project running. And don't worry if you're not in a position to buy any of my courses. There are other things you can do. You can just share the word. If you stumble upon something you find interesting or helpful, why don't you share it with somebody else who might find it interesting and helpful? In the rest of this episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about the courses that I offer and talk about who they are for, what kind of problems they are designed to solve, and so on. All courses that I offer have some things in common. So, for example, they focus mainly on how to learn. The tagline of Hacking Chinese is a better way of learning Mandarin, and my goal is for you to find that way. It's to find an approach for you that works best given your circumstances and given your goals for learning the language. This doesn't mean that there is no content to study in the courses. So, for example, in Unlocking Chinese, there is a sentence pack that introduces your first 150 words in Chinese in a nice, structured way. But that is not the main point of the course. I don't make courses where I tell you about the meaning of words in English and go through Chinese grammar and so on. There are many other people who do that, and my specialty here is telling you how to do these things and providing an approach and a strategy you can use to learn Chinese more efficiently. My courses also have two tiers. There is a cheaper basic version that contains all the content, all the videos, all the lessons, all the worksheets and so on, extra things to the course. Everything is included. And then there is also a more expensive tier where you get guidance and feedback manually from me. Exactly what that means and what is included is different for different courses, so do check out the information pages for more about this. But just to mention one example, in Unlocking Chinese, I help you with feedback on your basic pronunciation and how you write characters, and I also provide some input regarding a study plan that you build throughout this course. In A Practical Guide to Learning Mandarin, there are calls to action in each lesson and also some exercises, and so you submit these to me for some feedback and comments. Okay, so now we know a little bit about the general structure of these courses. Let's have a look at them each in turn. Let's start with Hacking Chinese Pronunciation, Speaking with Confidence. As the name implies, this course is all about pronunciation. It's both for beginners and intermediate students who want to make sure that their Mandarin is clear and easy to understand, but it's also for more advanced students who want to make sure that they are getting things right and want to sound more native-like. Pronunciation is, of course, an area where first and second language acquisition differ quite a lot. Almost all children learn their native language perfectly when it comes to pronunciation, at least according to the standards where they live or how people they are surrounded by speak the language. And that's simply not true for foreign adults. There are plenty of people who have studied Chinese for 10 years or more and still cannot pronounce basic tones. I have a friend who studied Chinese for about 4 years before he learned about tones or realized that tones are important, and he had to go back and relearn everything from scratch. And to put it mildly, this is not something that we recommend that students do. So the earlier you start focusing on pronunciation, the better it is, because when you've studied for years, fixing a problem can be quite hard. And I'm talking from personal experience here. I learned the third tone incorrectly and I was saying it wrong for a few years before someone really pointed out to me and said, hey, you're doing this wrong. You're saying it's not just a little wrong, it's completely off. And at first I didn't believe them even. I needed to verify this, but then after a bit I realized, okay, I'm just wrong. I've learned this incorrectly for some reason, and I've listened to people speak Chinese for hundreds of hours without noticing this. And once someone had pointed it out, I started gradually realizing, hey, this is actually how it sounds. I was able to gradually start saying it like that, and now we are some 10 years later, and I think I very rarely make this mistake. But without someone pointing this out and without me noticing this in the Chinese I was listening to, I would still have this problem. And I know many people who have learned Chinese for many years and still make this mistake. And I talked about this particular problem in episode 26 quite a lot, so if you're interested in it, you can check that out. Anyway, back to the pronunciation course. It covers all those things that your teacher went through very quickly in the first few weeks, and that's kind of in the beginning of your textbook, but you never actually spend time to go through. It covers everything about initials, finals, tones, but also prosody, so we're talking about things like rhythm, stress, and things like that. And it does so in depth, so you will know everything about pinyin. You will also be able to learn IPA, that's the International Phonetic Alphabet for these sounds, along with how to say the sounds and how to shape your tongue and where to put it and things like that. There's also an option to get professional feedback on your pronunciation, and this is something you can use as a beginner if you're not sure you're doing it right. So while you work your way through the course, you can submit recordings to me and I will personally go through them and give you feedback and highlight areas where you can improve and point out what you are already doing quite well. And if you've studied for a while, this includes if you've studied for many, many years, but you simply want to really check how good your pronunciation is, there's a second version of this check, where I go through your pronunciation on all levels. So it's words, phrases, free speech, and all of that. And I go through initials, finals, tones, your rhythm, prosody, everything. And I give you detailed breakdowns of what you're doing well and which areas you should improve, and also how to do so. And finally, I would like to share what I think is the most important advice when it comes to pronunciation, and that is to mimic. And I've said this a lot of times, so if you're a long-time listener or reader, you should be familiar with this by now. But mimicking is a very powerful method because it combines listening and listening very attentively, which is kind of the key to pronunciation, with pronunciation practice. Because if you're just speaking Chinese, the likelihood is that you're mainly relying on skills that you already have. In order for your brain to get enough data and information about how sounds are supposed to be, you need to listen, and you need to listen attentively. So when you mimic, you combine this, you listen to what someone else says, you say it along with that person, and you can then compare. And this is also very powerful because it can be done mostly on your own. Naturally, at some point, you do want feedback, but you can do a lot of this on your own, and it's often possible to hear when something is different from the original audio. Even if you're not necessarily sure exactly what is different, you can still find lots of mistakes on your own this way, and it is completely free. So if I were to go back in time and give myself advice about my own pronunciation, I would have said that I should mimic a lot more, and I should listen a lot more and pay attention. Not care that much about speaking myself necessarily, not how it's written, just listening and mimicking. Obviously, I would have liked to tell myself about my third tone issue a lot earlier, but we already talked about that. You can also check out episode 25 of the podcast, where I talked more about the course and also included the introduction to the course itself. Next up, we have my beginner course, Unlocking Chinese. So this is based on things that I know that most courses, textbooks, and teachers leave out. And while the course does include basic grammar, basic vocabulary, and so on, the main point of the course is teaching you how to learn these things. So this is not really a substitute for a university course, it's more like a companion you can use to get the most out of any other course, including things you might find online. So I don't teach you all the words manually one by one, I don't go through everything in detail, but I do provide the support you need to be able to learn as efficiently as possible. If we simplify things a lot, we can say that there are three factors that influence how much you learn. It is how much time you spend, how efficient your method is, and what content you're focusing on. So it follows that you need to find ways of studying that you enjoy, that you can make work with whatever other things you're doing in life, and this involves a certain amount of experimentation and thinking about learning in a way that doesn't limit it just to, say, language lessons. You can actually get a lot of listening and reading done throughout the day and throughout the week without actually adding that much more study time in the traditional sense. And this is something that requires you to understand the time you spend, what time you have available, and how you can fit various activities into your existing schedule. Naturally, how efficient your method is also quite important, because if you spend 100 hours doing something that is mostly useless, you are not going to learn much. So if your goal is to learn to speak Chinese and you spend 100 hours writing by hand, maybe it has almost no impact at all on your actual goal. So you need to make sure you are doing the right thing depending on what your goal is. So in this course, naturally, we go through that and we talk about efficient methods of learning various aspects of Mandarin. And finally, the third factor is what you are learning. And this is extremely important as a beginner because there is a set of very high frequency words that you really should learn before you learn lower frequency words. And the reason for this is, of course, that the more high frequency words you learn, the more likely you are to be able to make sense of what people say and write. And that increases the amount of comprehensible input, that is, reading and listening, that you can make sense of. And that enables you to acquire more language. This is not really a problem in most modern textbooks because the first few chapters actually do contain really, really high frequency words. You have to have pronouns and basic verbs and so on. But most textbooks actually start derailing quite fast and include lots of things that you actually don't need while leaving out some things you really, really need. And I've included a sentence pack in this course that teaches you 150 words, and it does so in a sequence where each sentence only adds a single word. So you should be able to make sense of this without any textbook and without much help, even though there is help if you actually need it. Unlocking Chinese is not only about how to learn the language, though, it's also about the language itself. And I focused on two areas here that I think most beginners struggle with because it tends to be quite different from learning other languages if you've done that. So the first of these is obviously pronunciation, because here we have tones. We also have lots of strange sounds that you haven't heard before. And if you just treat pinyin as English, you will have problems later. Very few adults achieve natural and clear pronunciation in Mandarin without actually trying to. Some people do, but most of us need to spend extra time and energy to make sure that we are understood when we speak, because there's nothing more demotivating than having learned something and then trying it out with real people and they simply frown or shrug and they simply don't know what you're saying. The other part of learning Chinese where it's beneficial to have a good idea of what you're doing is characters. And here it depends a little bit on where you're coming from and how much you know about characters in advance. But most people have lots of misconceptions about characters, such as they are pictures and you learn them best by writing them over and over and over, which is also sadly what some teachers recommend. Actually, the first question you might want to ask yourself is how much you actually need to learn here. Do you need to learn to write by hand? Should you even start learning characters from the very beginning, or should you maybe focus on the spoken language first? And we talked about this specific question in episode 1 of the podcast if you want to learn more about that. I think that's enough about unlocking Chinese. If you want to know more about it, you can go to hackingchinese.com/courses. The next course, which is actually one I created first, is called A Practical Guide to Learning Mandarin. And this course is, like I said, aimed at basically everyone except beginners who should definitely check out Unlocking Chinese first. But this course essentially covers the same topics that I do on Hacking Chinese in general, but does it in a video format with some exercises and extra content. And in this case, there's actually quite a lot of extra content. There is a 300-page ebook and an audio edition that I recorded of that ebook. There's also a study checklist and a bunch of discounts for various useful services. So, like Unlocking Chinese, this course also brings up things that I think are overlooked often in courses, and this is of course not limited to beginners now. One example of this is memory and memory techniques, which is something there is quite a lot of research into, and there's also a big community online of people who experiment with memory, compete in memory competitions and so on. And all these things can be applied to learning languages. It's not equally applicable to all areas, of course, but there's a lot we can learn from how these people learn things and how they remember them. For example, when it comes to Chinese characters. Another thing that is central here is to create an immersion environment at home. So some people think that you have to go to China to learn Chinese, or that it's impossible to learn Chinese if you stay at home. And this is simply not true. There are lots of people who go to China who don't learn Chinese, and there are people who master Chinese without ever leaving home. And if you want an example of that, you can check out my interview with Carl Jean Fordham in an article called Chinese Immersion with Carl Jean Fordham on Hacking Chinese. This is, of course, something that has become a lot easier in recent years. Then we have the internet and we have digital resources and so on. But building up this digital immersion environment at home is something that can be done. And in this course, I provide a few suggestions for how to do that, such as how to get audio, how to sort the audio, how to manage your files and things like that, so that you will gradually build up a library of things that you can immerse yourself into. If you want to find out more about this course, you can go to hackingchinese.com/courses and just select Hacking Chinese, a practical guide to learning Mandarin. Finally, we have the Fluent Listener navigating spoken Mandarin like a fish in water. This course focuses exclusively on listening comprehension, which is a big challenge for many learners. I have recorded a video introduction to this course, and I will put a link to that video in the show notes, but here I will include the audio, and you don't have to watch the video, it works perfectly well in audio only. So without further ado, let's now listen to the course intro video. I can ask questions, but when a native speaker replies, I'm completely lost. Even when I know the words, I still can't follow because they speak so fast. Listening to Mandarin feels like guessing. So many words sound the same. I understand my teacher, but anybody else might as well be speaking Martian. I know I need to listen more, but with so much to do, I keep putting it off. These are real concerns that need to be taken seriously. If you're struggling with listening comprehension in Mandarin, you are not alone. And no, you're not just imagining it, words really do sound more similar, and this is especially true if you haven't mastered tones yet. And while Chinese grammar can make speaking easier, it also makes listening harder. It is unfortunate that so many students struggle with listening because it is the most important skill of all. Improving listening ability will bring many benefits, such as helping you navigate conversations and build deeper connections with people. You will also be able to learn about language and culture and excel in exams such as the HSK or TOCFL. At work, being able to understand what's going on is also very important, and good listening ability can also accelerate your learning, not just making you better at listening, but improving in other areas too, including speaking. The good news? Improving listening ability isn't as hard as you might think. If you follow these 4 principles, you will make rapid progress. Listen more. Sticking with your textbook or teacher isn't enough. You need to build your own immersion environment, no matter where you live, and listen as much as you can. Understand more. Choose listening materials that you can make sense of and use strategies to comprehend more and also learn more over time. Communicate more. Focus on meaning and communication, not just practicing or drilling vocabulary and grammar patterns. And finally, enjoy yourself. This is the only way you will be able to listen enough, and it also makes learning much more fun. While these principles are indeed easy to describe, they are not so easy to implement. For example, what should you listen to, and what strategies are there that you could employ to understand more and learn more? And if you want to do more meaning-focused listening, how can you do that? And how can you find engaging and interesting content on the right level? This is why I created this course, The Fluent Listener, to help you improve your listening ability and navigate Mandarin like a fish in water. So what does it mean to be a fluent listener? Well, a fluent listener can process Mandarin effectively and navigate the spoken language in different situations. You can be fluent on any level, so if you're a beginner, you can be fluent when it comes to topics close to yourself, and then at an intermediate level, you can expand this to include other topics such as work, and then at an advanced level, you can include more complex and demanding topics and situations. Since this course focuses on how to become a fluent listener, it's suitable for all levels. When you enroll, you also gain access to a library of listening resources organized by proficiency level. You'll also join an exclusive learner community for mutual support and inspiration. Learning alongside others makes even the toughest challenge easier to manage. The Fluent Listener comes in 2 versions. The standard version includes everything I've been talking about so far. It's a complete video course teaching you how to become a fluent listener, and it also grants you access to the listening resource library and the learner community, along with some other tools that I have created to make listening ability easier to improve. There is also a guided version if you want support from me. For example, I will give you feedback on your study plan, and I will check in on your progress. I will also help you overcome challenges that you might encounter along the way. But why should you trust me? Who am I? My name is Ole Linge, and I've been learning Chinese since 2007, and a few years after that I started Hacking Chinese to help students find a better way of learning Mandarin. I've studied in many different settings: intensive immersion, graduate level courses, and learning Chinese on the side while being busy with work or other studies. I've also taught Chinese at all levels at university here in Sweden, and I've also coached many independent students over the years. I've also worked with professional development for language teachers for almost a decade now. Through all this, I've realized the importance of listening in language learning. Many students feel overwhelmed and don't know where to start, or they don't know how to approach listening effectively, or maybe they find it difficult to fit it in an already busy schedule. So the Fluent Listener is the result of all my research and experience, and beyond the listening resource library and the learner community, there are some 40 videos split into 5 sections. The first section deals with listening comprehension in a nutshell, telling you everything you really need to know. Then in section 2, we talk about listening comprehension in more depth, so we go beyond Timbodong and try to understand why it is that we do understand, and sometimes why we fail to understand, and also what we can do about this. In section 3, I try to answer the question what to listen to. How do you find suitable material at the right level, and indeed what is the right level? In section 4, we talk about method or how to listen, both to understand more but also how you should practice to learn more over time. And then in the last section, we talk about how to spend more time listening, which, as I said earlier, is easy to say that you should do, but harder to implement in practice. The goal of this course is to help you become a fluent listener, so you can reap the rewards of strong listening comprehension in Mandarin. I look forward to seeing you in the course. Okay, and we're now back to the podcast. Those are the 4 courses that I've created so far to help you learn Mandarin in a better way. And so the first 3 are on discount until August 20th, and Fluent Listener will open for registration in the last week of August. If you listen to this episode in the future after the discount in 2025 is over, you can always head to hackingchinese.com/courses for information about the courses and their availability. That's it for today. I wish you good luck with the new semester. I hope you achieve all your goals, and I hope to see you in one of my courses. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.